Hi, in this tutorial, I want to introduce you to CSS. Many of students that I've had in the past several years have found this to be the most challenging aspect of the course, and in many aspects it is, but once you understand it and feel comfortable with it, it really does get easy. So the term cascading style sheet, CSS, actually is derived from the fact that the rules that are applied are embedded into anything that is contained in a parent. For instance, I have, let's go into design view, so you can see I have a header, I have a navigation with an unordered list, I have a div, then I have a section that's contained within the div, and I have some other sections and a footer. So let's go into code view, and that you can see a UL, an unordered list, is embedded inside the nav. The header is by itself. Then I have a div and a section embedded into this div, and I've given it a ID of my div. That allows me to format this particular div without affecting any of the other divs in here. And then I've given a section ID for section here that does the exact same thing in here, and then we have a footer over here. So starting off with the body, any change that I make to the body will affect all of the items that are contained within it. In other words, the header, the nav, the UL, div, and all these things all the way down here to the footer will be affected by whatever I make a change for within text and a few other rules. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go into back into the actual design view that you can see over here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually explain some of the items that you're going to come across with CSS. The first thing is a class. A class is something that begins with a period, and you can make any rule that you want and change whatever property that you want, create whatever property you want. It will not be affected until you actually apply the class. Just like a heater, you can have it turned up to 80 degrees and have all these settings on the heater, but if the heater is not turned on, then it's not going to be affected. The next thing is an ID selector. So let's go back into code view. And an ID selector will begin with a number sign. Don't confuse it with this number sign over here. And so if I want to make a rule for my div that affects only my div, I will make a rule that begins with a number sign, and it will affect the my div and everything that's within the my div, which means the paragraph here, the section, and this paragraph as well. So anything that's within this opening div tag and closing div tag. Same thing with if I create a rule for section ID, then it will affect everything that's within the section ID. The next thing is a compound. That means there's two pieces to the puzzle. In other words, if I want to create something that's specific only to paragraph tags inside the footer, I can do footer space P. That's a compound. And then there's also pseudo classes. Pseudo classes you're only going to have to worry about when it comes to hyperlinks, where you have an A tag, and you're going to have an A:hover, A:link, A:active, and A:visited. That means affect the anchor tag, but only during a specific state. For instance, the Hoover affects it only when your mouse is over it, and you'll see it normally turned into a little hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a class, and that you'll see that it will not be affected until I actually create it. Now, the first thing I have to do is actually create a source. So all of our code is going to be within a single CSS file, and some websites will have multiple CSS files. So to create a source, all we have to do is click on the plus sign. And what do we want to do? We want to create a new file. We want to attach an existing file,
or we would define in the page. We're always going to be creating a new file or attaching an existing file. We're not going to normally do anything defined in the page, and that will apply only if you want something specific to that particular page. The disadvantage of doing that is if you wanted it to affect multiple pages, it won't work. So we're going to create a new CSS file, and all you have to do is browse. And we're going to go into the CSS. This is the site I had to design for this. And eventually get there. There we go. And I already have one created called styles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it my styles. If I create this one and attach this styles, and everything that's already in there will affect it. So let's just click on save. And then you'll get, once you click on OK, you'll get a nasty message that it's not have a path and so on and so forth. If you don't get it, then that's only because your file hasn't been saved. I've already saved it, and I won't get that message anymore. So notice what it did for us up here. Put a link, href, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to worry about what that means, other than the fact that you need to make sure that it's pointing to the proper style, which is done for you automatically. And then the rest over here is for the browser's compatibility in here. So now we have a style sheet. If we go back in here, it's already there. You do not have to worry about media in this class. That is for the advanced websites that are different for a tablet, different for a cell phone, different for a small desktop screen, and different for a larger desktop screen. We are not going to do that, although if you do the bootstrap, which is optional in this class, then you will get introduced into that. For time space, we are not going to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually create a selector. Just click in here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a body tag. And I want to show you that that's going to affect everything that's in the body. So once we create the body tag, we have the layout, the text, borders, and background that are available to us. The book will allow you to do something in the more. We're not going to do it in this tutorial. The show set will only apply for rules that have been, or properties that have been already set. So if I click on show set, nothing's there. So let's create a color for the text, and you'll see that it should affect everything. We'll make it green, which is one of my favorite colors. And we'll click on OK. Now notice nothing happens here because we're in actual code view. So let's click on design view, and you can see everything has been changed with the exception of the unordered list. And the reason for that is they are being defined somewhere else. Remember, with CSS, the last rule wins. So basically what I'm saying is make all of the text here green in color unless you previously have defined it and it comes afterwards. So in other words, if I had created a rule for unordered list, that will override what's in here. So you notice that it affected everything in here. And normally what's good rule of thumb is to make the body black. Start out with black, and if you want a different color, then you can change it there. So now we have it in here. So notice that we have the div, my div, so on and so forth, and we have a section in here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually create a ID type of rule. So we're going to click on selector. So to create the ID rule, you begin with the number sign and my div. Now notice nothing's applied, so let's change this color here to red and hit the enter key. And let's go back in design and see what happens. So you notice everything here has been changed to red, but nothing else has been changed. Let's go back into code view, and you can see everything from here within this div tag has been affected. So maybe we say we don't want all of it changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rule for section. And I'll create just a plain section. And I'm going to change the color to blue. And I'll show you what that does. Let's go back into design view. So notice that it affected this section here and this section here, because anything that's within a section is going to override anything that's without it. So this div over here, which we defined in my div, is being overridden by what's the section. So you say, well, what happens if I only wanted this particular section to be blue and not all the section? That's very easy. So what I can do here is I can edit this, and this is where the compound comes from. Let's just do my div space section, and let's see what that does. Okay, now notice what that did was it kept it here, and it kept the other section, went back to black, because that's what's being defined in the body. So let's go over this right here. This means only affect a section that's contained within an ID that has my div. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a mistake, and I'm going to change this to section my div and delete this. Okay, notice it went back to red. And the reason for that being, this is saying only affect a tag that's within a section called my div. Well, that doesn't apply here. It applies only if I were to create one inside a section. So we can't do that. Let's just go back and change this here. And make that section. So again, this just means affect only a section that's within a my div. So what I'm going to do now, let's go back into CoView and we'll take a look over here. So now we have section and we have a P. So let's create a rule for a paragraph that's strictly within a section. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change something to an H1 tag. So let's go back in here, and here's the section. I'm going to put this is a heading 1. And all I have to do is click in it and change the format to heading 1. Now it's a heading 1. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a paragraph rule for anything that's within a section. But the first thing I'm going to do here is let's create a class instead. So to create a class, again, put it in here, and let's just call it dot section stuff. I'm not a big fan of making classes the same of a tag. In other words, I could have put dot section. However, that's up to you. I'm just not a big fan of it. There's nothing wrong with it. So let's click on that. It's just not good programming. So basically, nothing's happened. So let's change the text color to something yellow. And let's go back in here, and we're in design, and nothing's changed. So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually apply the class to this section. And we're going to apply it to the class, not to the section ID. So let's apply the class here to section stuff. Okay, now notice every single thing here was affected. The heading was affected, the paragraph was affected because we applied it to the whole section. But we only want to apply it to the paragraph. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to modify this and put a P there. That means I only want to affect a paragraph tag that's contained within a container that is a section stuff class. So let's click on that and notice that changed in there. So that's as much as I'm going to do right now in this video. I do want to go over the CSS Designer. It can be very intimidating. I hated it at the very beginning, but now I love it most of the time. So if you go into the layout, you'll see the things you're going to set are width, height. Most of the time, you're not going to set a minimum width or a minimum height, but they do come in handy to make sure that your divs do have a specific height or width. Display is normally going to be block, inline, and sometimes table or table cell if you're actually doing different columns. And you'll see that in our project. The margin affects everything that's outside the container. In other words, we have the body. If I were to put a margin on the body of 10, or let's just make it 20, that will affect the top in here. Now, it's not applying it over here because it's already being overridden somewhere else, and actually, I put it in the wrong thing. So let's fix this in Code View. I'm going to go into My Styles, and I'm just going to take this margin top here and delete it and put it inside the body. That is the very first thing to do, is to go into Code View and see if you apply to the right class or the right rule when something doesn't work. So notice we have this margin on top. So let's increase it by clicking here. And by the way, if you're here and you click on body and it doesn't change, just click on current, and that will change it for you automatically. So what we're going to do here is let's just change this to 50, and you'll see how that affects it, and we'll make the left margin 50 as well. You will use margin often when you're doing formatting for columns and you want something to appear to the right of something. You can use float left, you can do more. There's many different ways to do it. So notice that we have it affecting the top over here. So the actual margin itself affects only what's outside of the actual container. The padding, which is next, affects from the border to the inside. So what I'm going to do to make it easier for you to understand it, I'm going to click on border, and we want everything to be shown. So I'm going to do, this affects the top, left, right, and bottom. I'm going to affect let's do a thick border. The style, if you don't set the style, you won't see anything. And the color, we'll do red for just what happened to be here. And let's go into live. And you'll see that it created a border around here. Now, if you do something and it doesn't show, go into live view before you start going crazy looking to see if you did something wrong. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to stay in design, and I'm going to go into padding. Padding will affect everything from the border itself to the actual text. So let's put a top border or top margin and padding. We don't want to do the margin, but we do want to do the padding of 10 and 10. The reason why you do that is so it's easier to read. It's not shoved up against there. So you can see that it's done. If I increase it, to say 30, you can see that it will bring everything down in here. And let's continue on. Okay, the position we're going to leave for now. The floating, I'm going to leave for now. But basically what floating does is it allows you to put elements next to each other. So now we have the text. And this color here is the text color. It would be nice if they make it text color, but it's text color. The font family allows you to choose different fonts. It's important that you understand that your computer may have a font that somebody's computer doesn't have. So you always want to stick to simple things. So if we choose Baskerville, that means if the computer that the person's working on has Baskerville, show that. If not, show Palatino Linotype. If not, show Palatino. If not, show Century School Book. Not show Times New Roman, and then show anything. Most of the time, they're going to have it. I strongly suggest that you keep with something very simple, such as Gil Sans or Times New Roman, so on, and just be very, very careful with that. Okay, the font style allows you normal, italic, or oblique, but you're not going to use oblique, but let's use normal and italic. Font variant allows you to make it small caps. That's effective. Font weight, if you want to make it bold. Font size allows you to make the size. Now let me discuss this M. Most of the time we're going to be working in pixels, but EM just means whatever the font is, 1M is the normal size. If you want it twice the size, you'll make it 2M. If you want it half the size, you'll make it 0.5N. Then, of course, text height is pretty self-explanatory. Align is important. We're normally going to use left align, but there's times that we want to use center align, and sometimes we want to use right align. I highly recommend that you don't use justify because it can spread things out and put all kinds of spaces in here. Text decoration is normally for links. We use normally none or underline. So you can see this link here has an underline. So if we were to change the body and change the text underline, it may or may not work. The reason why it may not work is because of what is being defined afterwards. So if you want to know if it's going to work, choose none and see if it works, which it did not. And that's because an unordered list or a link is actually overriding that there. So let's see these other things over here. Text transform allows you to change things to capitalized, first letter capitalized, all lowercase. Letter spacing allows you to put spacing between letters, and that's effective for for titles. Word spacing, the same thing, allows you to put spacing between words. We're going to leave these things in here alone. And I'm going to pick up on the border in my next tutorial. So have a wonderful day and see you soon.